Welcome to CAB Radio 2.0. Here are your hosts, Chris Perkins, Mark Cummins, and Jeff Giles.
So, Michael, I do have a few questions. I'm kind of wondering about the mainstreamers. What's going on now? Are they more willing to listen to you at this point? Like, since you've done a lot. So, I mean, are we moving forward here, and are they catching on? Are they starting to listen to you now?
I think some of them are. This is, as far as the mainstream scientists are concerned in my work, I see three major groups. You've got one group of scientists that I call the fundamentalist materialists, who are very much committed to the current Darwinian evolutionary ideas, not so much, I think, for purely scientific reasons, but for more or less ideological reasons. It confirms their prior belief in atheism and materialism, so they're kind of very much in that camp. And they're very much opposed to the kinds of things that I do. They don't want to hear what I have to say. They don't want anybody else to hear what I have to say. Sometimes I've been scheduled to give lectures at universities, and then the lectures get canceled and things like that. There's another group of scientists in the mainstream who may accept the current theories, but for more or less scientific reasons, which means they're open to listen to alternative ideas and evidence that contradicts the current ideas. And it's scientists in that group, that more open-minded group, that have invited me to speak at leading international scientific institutions like the Royal Institution in London, the Russian Academy of Sciences in Moscow, and others. And I've been able to present papers at major international scientific conferences in the field of archaeology and human origins, like meetings of the World Archaeological Congress and some other meetings of other scientific associations in that area. And some of my papers presented at those conferences have been published in peer-reviewed scientific publications. Now, I think I don't want to say that all the people who listen to me agree with me or endorse what I have to say, but I think the fact that there is a significant group of scientists that is willing to listen to some new and alternative ideas is an important sign. And I think if ideas are going to change, the first thing is people have to be willing to listen to new ideas. So I regard that as significant. Actually, my most recent book, My Science, My Religion, is a collection of 24 papers I've presented about the kinds of things we've been talking about this evening. The archaeological evidence that humans have existed for millions of years, the idea that the conscious self is not produced by the brain. I've been able to present these ideas at scientific conferences, and this latest book of mine, My Science, My Religion, is a collection of 24 papers that I've presented at major international scientific conferences on these topics. So I would say there are some slight signs of hope for progress in these areas, but don't want to minimize the challenges either, because this first group that I was talking about, the fundamentalist materialists, are very powerful and influential in the world of science today. And, of course, I mentioned there are three groups. The people who are very much opposed to me, the people who are open-minded and willing to listen, and then there are scientists who actually agree with me, who are very few in number these days, that I have to admit, but there are some. And then there are those who simply don't care about these things at all. So,
sure, of course.
I think real scientists are supposed to be open-minded. Otherwise, they come off looking like shills, like Bill Nye. Right. I don't even look at him as a scientist. Sorry, I don't.
Yeah, well, say personally, I don't mind, say, if an individual scientist is a supporter of the Darwinian theory of evolution. If they've looked at all the evidence and that's what makes most sense to them, then fine. I respect intellectual freedom. What I don't think they have a right to do is try to convince government to exclude all other ideas from the education system and thus marginalize and silence opposition to their ideas. I don't think they have a right to do that. I think any individual has a right to accept whatever makes most sense to them, but I don't think that any individual or group of individuals, even if they're the majority of scientists, have the right to tell government to exclude every other idea from the textbooks in the classrooms.
Okay. So I want to go back to... I'm sorry, Chris, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I was just thinking, couldn't the mainstreamers actually use what you found to help their case? That's what I've came across. I thought that there was there could be a lot of theories, mainstream theories that actually could use the things that you found that would actually help their case. I'm kind of wondering why. I'm not wondering why they don't use it. I kind of have an idea of why they're not using it. It has, but
they don't want to be ostracized by the community. They don't want to be critical.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I think there are things that I say that could be, for example, I think there is a kind of evolution that goes on, but not the kind that they talk about exactly today.
Right.
I think there's an evolution of consciousness in the course of reincarnation. A soul or a conscious self might be in the body of an animal, and then gradually, lifetime after lifetime, it will come up to the human form. So there can be an evolution of consciousness that I think is a reality. And, they may take that idea, and that would be a better kind. If they want to accept evolution, fine, but the kind that they're talking about, I think, doesn't work. But I think an evolution of consciousness would work.
Okay. So I asked earlier about ET influence. Do you think, because I've always suspected that ET influence, that they've been influencing our DNA, possibly they even created humanity some times ago. And could that be the case? And could that be why the religions believe that God created the universe? I mean, not the universe, but humanity. And could it, instead of being God, really just be some ET species that created us to be like a slave race, and over time have genetically manipulated us and attempting to create, to upgrade us, I should say?
Well, there are people and researchers who are supporters of that idea. And, there are elements of that idea that I do accept. Sometimes the way researchers who support that idea present it is like this. They would say, life came from chemicals, as mainstream science says, a couple billion years ago on this planet. And then the single-celled creatures became multi-celled creatures in the ocean. And then some of them came on the land and became animals. Some of the animals became monkeys and apes. And then some of the apes and monkeys about 6 or 7 million years ago became the first ape men, and those ape men gradually developed for a couple million years until about 300,000 or 400,000 years ago, at which time the supporters of this idea would say some extraterrestrials came from some other part of the universe and manipulated the DNA to produce a slave race. So they would say the process of materialistic evolution went on up to the point of the ape man called Homo erectus about 300,000 or 400,000 years ago, at which time there was an extraterrestrial intervention where they manipulated the DNA of the ape men on this planet to produce human beings, the first ones about 300,000 or 400,000 years ago, and they used them as a slave race to mine gold. Now, there are elements of that I would agree with and elements that I would disagree with. The main thing to keep in mind, as far as I'm concerned, is we're not just machines made of matter that are controlled by DNA. As I said, I think there's a conscious self that exists apart from matter. Now, in that sense, I would say we're all extraterrestrials. As conscious selves, we're not from the world of matter. We're from a higher level of reality. So I would say we're all extraterrestrials. None of us are from this world of matter that we now inhabit. We're all from some higher level of reality. Now, as far as our human vehicle is concerned, I would say, as I've shown in my book, Forbidden Archaeology, there's evidence that the human vehicle, the human form of life, has been on Earth for millions and millions of years, tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of years.
Wow.
So I wouldn't agree with the idea that 300,000 or 400,000 years ago, some extraterrestrials came and manipulated the DNA of the ape men and produced the first human beings like us about 300,000 or 400,000 years ago. I would say that at the beginning of the history of life on Earth, an extraterrestrial being manifested the human vehicles for conscious selves to inhabit on this level of reality. And when I say extraterrestrial being, I have an expanded conception of what it means to be an extraterrestrial. Some were very much influenced by the ideas of modern materialistic science would say that an extraterrestrial is simply another flesh and blood machine made of matter like us, but just from some other part of the universe. I would say within the term extraterrestrial, we have to include all kinds of beings that people would categorize as angels, gods, God with a capital G, and things like that.
Right.
Higher beings, higher dimensional beings, not only extraterrestrial, but extra-dimensional beings. So I would say at the beginning of the history of life on Earth, a couple billion years ago, extraterrestrial beings, who I would say were what people might call demigods, on behalf of the Supreme God with a capital G, manifested the first human vehicles for conscious selves to inhabit on this level of reality. And then those human vehicles began to reproduce themselves on this level of reality. But that would be a couple billion years ago, not 300,000 or 400,000 years ago. So the two views have something in common. Extraterrestrial beings, as conscious selves, we're all extraterrestrial beings, but there are higher level extraterrestrial beings who at the beginning of creation manifested the human vehicles, plant vehicles, animal vehicles for conscious selves to inhabit on this level of reality. So there's some ideas that I have in common with the researchers who are proposing this scenario that you propose, but also some differences. And I would say I want to focus more on what I have in common with such people than with what differences I have with them. But normally, if you listen to me talk in lectures or you read any of my books, I don't get very much into criticizing the ideas of others in the alternative history field.
Right.
But if somebody asks me a direct question about what I think about a particular idea, I just say what I have to say and then let people make up their own minds what they want to believe. Because I do respect that intellectual freedom that each individual has to come up with whatever idea most makes sense to them.
So, Michael, I have a quick question here, because we were talking a little bit ago about ancient wisdom. What are your takes? Do you think, because you're mentioning that there is a higher self, and you're talking about telepathy and remote viewing, awesome subjects, can it even go further? Because a lot of these ancient wisdom societies, they talk about how we can heal others and do all sorts of crazy stuff. Basically, whatever our mind thinks it's capable of doing, subtracting the doubt. And also, you speak of India. I heard a rumor that Jesus, aka Yeshua, during his 13 years of his missing life, what the Bible skips over, that he actually took a trip to India and learned a lot of stuff with the mystics there and the shamans. Do you know of anything about that?
Well, I know that is an idea that's circulating out there. I mean, one source of that idea is a book called The Aquarian Gospel, which was written early in this century by a Christian minister in the United States who claimed to be channeling this information from some higher source. And, he mentioned, as you said, that Christ journeyed to India, and I don't think that's outside the realm of possibility, because at the time of Christ, people did travel from the Middle East overland to India. That happened. Actually, there's a very old Christian community in India that historically dates to the time of St. Thomas, who was one of the original apostles, who is said to have gone to India right after that, and that's just a known fact. So I don't think it's impossible that Christ went, and there are some Christian sources that speak about these things. Of course, they're coming from what you might call esoteric sources. And even on the Indian side, there's a text called the Bhavishya Purana, which is several thousand years old, but it contains a prediction that someone named Isa would come from the West to India and manifest different miracles and things like that. Now, some people would say that's an interpolation into the text at a later date, post-Christian, maybe during a few hundred years ago somebody inserted that. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. So there are some indications from both the Christian side and the Indian side that Christ did visit India. Whether he did or not, I'm not sure. But to me, it's not an impossible idea. It could definitely have happened, but I think to really establish that, we need more direct proof.
Mm-hmm. Right. You mentioned channeled entities, and their information is usually far out there, and not hard to. All of it's impossible to confirm. So it is almost just like teasing the intellectual side. It really is.
Yeah, now, I think it is possible for there to be genuine communications of verifiable information that come by those means, but it depends who you're trying to convince.
Right.
For people who are already in that modality, and who accept such things, and who, but I'm, in my work, a lot of times I'm dealing with people who are open-minded but still a little bit skeptical and are looking for verification and things of that sort. So it depends who you're actually dealing with and what they regard as credible or not. And generally, I'm trying to reach out beyond the circle of people who are already accepting of these kinds of things and trying to reach the more open-minded people who might be able to accept at least the possibility of these things. So for them, it helps to have some third-party verification, some verification of the content of channeled communications.
Right. Have you read the book? And I asked another guest this before. Have you read the book Gods of Eden?
I've heard that title, but I can't remember if I've actually, over the course of 30 or 40 years, I've read thousands of books. The title sounds familiar, but I can't. It doesn't. I can't really call it up out of my memory banks what the book is about. What is it about?
Well, it's about that ET influence, starting with I think back with Sumeria, and mainly the secret societies, the formation, the intention at first, and how they became corrupted over time, and Enlil and Enki, the Anunnaki gods, whatever.
Yeah, wasn't that Joseph Farrell that you?
Yeah, I believe so. So.
Pretty sure.
He didn't write it. William Bradley.
No. You asked him about it though. That was the guest that you asked. So yeah.
Okay, yeah. I can't remember who wrote it. I think I'm mixing up Bradley Manning with the guy. It's not. I don't know who wrote it. I have the book somewhere here.
But like I said, different researchers are inspired by different wisdom traditions. From what you're saying, whoever wrote that book was inspired by the Sumerian text. You were mentioning some of the phrases that come out of the Sumerian wisdom tradition,
right?
Which I'm not so deeply familiar with. Like I said, some researchers in alternative history are inspired by the Egyptian text and some the Sumerian. I'm more focused on the Indian text myself. So, but you find parallel ideas in these texts of these different wisdom traditions. They may use different terminologies,
right?
But
kind of match.
The basic concepts are kind of the same. The ideas of extraterrestrials who may themselves be divided into hostile groups, using the Earth as kind of like a battlefield and trying to recruit personalities on Earth for their different alliances and things like that. That can happen.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I still can't find the book, but I know it's based on the work of Sitchin, though.
Yeah, who was basically inspired by the Sumerian text.
Right. Something I did want to get into, not to cut you off, but I wanted to get into the metallic spheres.
Oh, okay.
That's something I'm very interested in, because I was talking with a friend about it, and he had a whole different thing about it, a whole different aspect of it, but it didn't match up with what I was talking about, or what you talked about, Mr. Cremo.
What was he talking about? What was your friend talking about?
Well, how it was kind of just natural. And like the mainstream idea about the spheres, right? Isn't that the idea that it's kind of natural how they just form? And
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, let me try to explain it.
Please.
What we're talking about is something I wrote about in the appendix of my book, Forbidden Archaeology.
Yeah.
That's that miners have found in South Africa, in a mine there in the western Transvaal region, these round objects shaped like spheres that have grooves going around the center of them, around the equator. Some have one groove, some have two, some have three, and I call them metallic. They came to my attention when I was doing the research for my book, Forbidden Archaeology, back in the 1980s. And, I call them metallic, because, say, after Forbidden Archaeology was published, there was a television producer named Bill Cote from New York who was doing a documentary called The Mysterious Origins of Man. And he wanted to use some of the cases from my book in the documentary. So I mentioned to him these metallic spheres from South Africa. And he decided to include them in the documentary, and the documentary aired on NBC, but before the documentary aired, NBC said you have to get these things analyzed by an independent company of metallurgists, to see what their explanation for them was. So the producer sent them to an independent company of metallurgists, and they replied that they could not explain how they could have formed naturally. And especially we're talking about the parallel grooves that go around the center of each object. And, there are, it may be possible that they could form naturally in the layers of the Earth. But there are in the United States, in the western United States, there's something called moki balls. That comes from a Native American language. And there are balls of sediment that form in the layers of the Earth, but and some of them have a groove on them, but it looks very crude compared to the South African examples, where you've got these round objects with maybe 3 or 4 very fine parallel grooves going around the center of them. So I'm open to the possibility they could be natural formations, but up to the present moment, I haven't seen any natural examples that really match the South African examples. So, but I think everybody's free to make up their own minds about them. But I once gave one to another. I sent one to the independent company of metallurgists to examine, and they said they couldn't figure out how they could have been naturally formed, which indicates that we have to be open to the possibility that, and these things are found in mineral deposits about 3 billion, not million, but billion years old in South Africa.
Wow.
So, I wanted to include them in my book because they seemed relevant and they were an unexplained mystery. But if somebody could show me a naturally formed example from any other part of the world that really matched the South African examples, then that would be, but thus far that hasn't happened. The examples that I've seen from other parts of the world really are much cruder.
Well, I'm looking at a photo of it right now, the sphere, and it definitely doesn't look like it's naturally forming. I mean, that just looks like,
Yeah, and once, because sometimes people might say, okay, they were analyzed by the metallurgical company, and they're made of hematite, which is a naturally occurring type of iron ore. It's also like a semi-precious stone. You can buy hematite jewelry. But I went to South Africa, and I met the mining engineer from the mine where these things are found, and he showed me I met him in Johannesburg, not at the mine, but he showed me a solid block of rock from the mine that had these objects firmly embedded in the rock, and some of them were kind of protruding out of the rock halfway, and they had these grooves going back around the object back into the solid rock, which indicated to me these things, it's not that somebody just took some natural round concretion and then carved some grooves on it, after it came out of the rock. These things were solidly embedded in the natural rock. Now, to me, they were very interesting. So, but, I can understand, some people may prefer to think, well, somehow or other they form naturally. That's their right.
Right.
I'm kind of curious how they would form naturally.
Well, that is the question, how it formed.
Yeah.
I mean, they would say somehow or other. See, this is where it becomes difficult, where you try to explain all the parallel grooves.
Right.
That's the thing.
Yeah, they would say, like at some point, like when the mineral was soft and it kind of coalesced into a round form, then maybe it was kind of floating half out of the water, and the water made a little ring around it, like the ring around the bathtub or something, and but I don't know.
To me, it seems silly. That I don't know. That might just be me, but that just it just kind of seems silly.
Yeah, I'm kind of leaning in the direction of thinking that somebody with human-like intelligence made them. But if somebody could really convince me that, and could show me how you could get a perfectly spherical hematite object with these grooves on it, naturally, I'd accept it.
Right.
But it hasn't, and it's not enough to show me something that's sort of like it. like if you're on the web now and you look up Moki balls, MOQUI, Moki balls, you can probably see some round sandstone objects with maybe one groove around the center, but it's very crude and not like the example of the South African sphere.
I've always wondered. There's another thing that I've actually wanted to ask you about the. I've seen pictures of bones of giants. Are these real?
Well, I believe giants existed in the past. It's part of a lot of the different ancient wisdom traditions. The Bible talks about Goliath. The ancient Sanskrit writings of India say that in past cycles of time, living things were bigger than they are today. And, it's like, but, there's a lot of pictures circulating on the web. I mean, and people send them to me regularly. I mean, years ago, people started sending me this picture of this huge giant skeleton lying in the ground, and there were all little human figures, archaeologists around it, like digging it up and things. And I looked at the picture very carefully, and I could see that, by studying the shadows on the skeleton, that the source of light, the sun, was high and to the rear. Now there was a man standing behind the skull, and he should have been casting a shadow right on top of the skull, but there was no shadow there. So that kind of tipped me off. Okay, and then another thing that happened is, like, there would be different writings about this particular picture, saying it was from Brazil, it was from Arabia, it was from, and you try to track these things down, and you run into a dead end. You can't actually go to the place, see the bones or anything. Right. So, and it turned out that it was admitted by the person who made this. It was a Photoshop thing, and it was, he had submitted it as part of a contest somewhere, and it started circulating on the web, and people were writing about it and sending it to me. So things like that, in this day and age, things like that do happen. But there are lots of reports of discoveries of large-size human bones being found. Now, the problem is that they're very difficult to track down, but one of the most authoritative reports that I've ever seen comes from France. There was a French archaeologist named Lapouge, Georges de Lapouge, who in 1890 discovered large-sized human bones, not complete skeletons, but a thigh bone and an upper arm bone and other human bones in a place called Castelnau in central France. And these were published. What makes them different from a lot of the reports is that they were published in a scientific journal, and there were photographs of these, a human femur or thigh bone and a human humerus or upper arm bone. And, if you have, say, a thigh bone, a femur, and you can measure it, scientists can tell you how big, how tall the person with such a thigh bone would have been. And they calculated that a person with a thigh bone the size of this one from Castelnau in France, I'm probably not pronouncing that right, but the spelling is Castelnau. A person would have to have been about 11 feet tall to have a thigh bone that size. So that's the the best documented report I've been able to find thus far of some actual human skeletal remains of someone of giant size. Of course, there are lots of skeletons of people have been found, like in Nevada and some places in the United States of people 7 feet tall. But there are living people 7 feet tall. They play on the NBA basketball teams. So they're there, But there's nobody 11 feet tall around today.
Right.
So,
right.
And I remember once a few years ago, there was a man in New Zealand who liked my book, Forbidden Archaeology, and he was a businessman in New Zealand. So he invited me to come to New Zealand and give some lectures. And he met me at the airport, and he said he wanted to take me to the Museum of Natural History in Auckland the next day, because a friend of his worked there and was going to show us the skeleton of a human being 10 feet tall from some Pacific island. So we went the next morning, and the man met us, and he took us around the museum, showing us the dinosaurs, this, that, and the other. But we finally asked, what about the human skeleton? And he said, I'm sorry, I can't show it to you. So, that's the difficulty. These things may be there, but they're very difficult to track down. And as far as the photographic evidence that circulates on the web, I mean, I firmly believe giants did exist, but this photographic evidence leaves a lot to be desired, I think, in the way of definite proof.
Michael, it's really unfortunate that someone would even attempt to fake a photo like that, because he
was just doing it for the guy who made it was just doing it for a contest. Right,
but then someone hears that and they think, well, all photos must be faked. It's like the same thing with the with like pictures of UFO that are faked and the crop circle that was faked. And I say this however you want to take it, but I've seen UFOs many times. I haven't seen UFOs recently for like the last 12 or 13 years, but I did. However, I didn't tell anybody this except some family. I saw a UFO it was like a week ago or whatever, when Anthony Antonello was on that night. Shortly after, I saw that night. It was kind of crazy.
Well, I've seen some strange things, but, a couple years ago, I was a speaker at an event called Contact in the Desert, in the Los Angeles area, out in the Joshua Tree area there. And one night after the conference, it was during a time of a meteor shower, so I was looking for meteors. But I saw this one light object, go across the sky, like a meteor just kind of flashes, and then it's gone. But this object was going across the sky like an airplane, but it was going so fast across the sky that, I'd never seen anything flying that fast.
Right.
So, for me, that was like a UFO. I don't have any, detailed contactee type experiences myself, but, I have seen some things that are pretty hard to explain.
Yeah. So your thoughts on...
Once I remember I was giving a lecture on my book, Forbidden Archaeology, in Germany, and in the audience there was a man, and he came up to me and he talked to me later, and because I was talking about how in archaeology there's knowledge filtration and things, and he said, well, there's knowledge filtration going on in a lot of different areas, like this UFO field is one of them. I've been invited to speak at a lot of UFO conferences about my forbidden archaeology because the common thread is knowledge filtering, suppression of information. And this man, he turned out to be a pilot for one of the major American airlines. And he told me, he said, once I was going across the Atlantic and flying at night, and this light, this object that started coming, closing rapidly, just right towards the front of my airplane, and then it went straight up.
Wow.
And a regular aircraft cannot make a maneuver like that, just be going and make a sudden right angle turn, straight up.
No way.
And he said,
yeah.
And he said, I saw it. Co-pilot saw it, and, but we didn't say anything about it, because you report anything like that, you get,
right. I saw a very strange object while on an airplane once.
You get tangled up in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't even know what it was. It didn't look solid. I mean, it looked like a solid light. It was like, I think the word is, I don't know what it was very strange. It looked like a peg, like a very large white peg. Like it was flat on the top and bottom. It was spherical. It was round. I can't exactly. And it was just flying, floating by the wing. And by the time I saw it, it was going like backwards a little bit, so it went behind the wing, and I couldn't see it anymore. Very strange.
A gremlin.
A gremlin? What is this?
That's like during World War II, the pilots used to see things like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they called them. That's one of the things they called them.
Okay. So, Chris, you have a few more questions, right?
Yeah, I do. We got about 20 minutes left. There was a few things I did want to talk about. Michael, I know you're familiar with the coin that was found in Illinois.
Yeah, that was an object that was found at Lawn Spring, Illinois. It was back in the 19th century, and they were drilling a well for water. So they'd gone down to about 114-foot level, and they brought up this copper coin-like object, and it had on it, on both sides, it was round, made of copper. On both sides there were human figures and a script in some unknown language. And it was reported to the scientific world by a researcher from the Smithsonian Institution. He said it looks like it was milled, like a copper coin. And and then what we did is, from his report, in his report they had the drilling record, that the drill had gone down through 5 feet of topsoil and 6 feet of sandstone and 8 feet of clay, and all they had the drilling record down to 114 feet, which is the level that this coin came up from. So we sent the drilling record to geologists from the State Geological Survey of Illinois, and asked them how old is the formation down at the 114-foot level. Now, we didn't mention to them, I'm talking about my co-author for Forbidden Archaeology, we didn't mention to them that a coin had been found, because then they might not have answered our letter. We just wanted to leave it just purely on the level of geology. How old is that formation down there? And they said that formation is between 200,000 and 400,000 years old.
Wow.
So that means the coin came up from that level. Now, the normal mainstream idea in the world of archaeology and history is that the first coins were made about 3,000 years ago at a place called Lydia, which is in the Middle East now.
Like Turkey around here.
Yeah, part of Turkey.
Yeah.
And so the oldest coins are 3,000 or 4,000 years old. So to have a coin being found in North America at over 200,000 and perhaps as much as 400,000 years old really challenges our whole concept. Because if you have a coin, that means it had writing on it. So it had writing. It means you had to have some kind of economic or political system, some kind of developed economy. And in the same part of the country, from other excavations, they pulled up other metal objects that appear to be the types, from formations of the same age, roughly, that appear to be like the metal objects that you would find on a sailboat, like a sailing craft, for attaching the sails to the mast and things like that. So, but that's, the coin from Lawn Spring, Illinois, which I think is a fascinating object.
I'm going to have to look that up.
You should. Yeah, I was very intrigued. Another thing before we...
And then there's another thing from Illinois. There's a couple things from Illinois. There was another case of... there was a woman in Illinois who was... This is back in the 1890s. She was putting coal into a coal-burning stove, and one of the pieces was too big. So she broke open the piece of coal. She was trying to break it in half so it would fit better in the coal-burning stove, and she saw a gold chain. And the chain was about 10 inches long, and it was firmly embedded right into the piece of coal. Like, she picked up the chain, and the two pieces of coal were hanging off either side of the chain. So this was in Morrisonville, Illinois. So what we did, the newspaper report about this discovery included the name of the mine that the coal came from. So we got in touch again with the State Geological Survey of Illinois, and we asked them, well, how old is the coal from that particular mine? And they told us that's about 300 million years old. And then another report from Illinois was there was a case of a human skeleton being found 90 feet under the surface of the ground in Macoupin County, Illinois, which is down in the southern part of the state near St. Louis. And this was reported in a scientific journal called The Geologist in the year 1862. So this skeleton, human skeleton, was found 90 feet below the surface of the ground, and according to the report, above the skeleton was a thick layer of slate rock that was unbroken. And that's an important detail, because sometimes when people hear something like this, they say, well, obviously the skeleton had to have come down from some higher level through some fissure or crack in the ground or something like that. But above the skeleton was this thick layer of slate rock that extended for hundreds of yards, and it was unbroken, and the skeleton was underneath it. So we asked the geologist of the State Geological Survey of Illinois, how old is the formation under the slate at that place, at that depth? They said, again, that's about 300 million years old. So you've got a gold chain from the state of Illinois, about 300 million years old. A human skeleton, 300 million years old. And that's from before the time of the dinosaurs, according to the standard idea.
Oh, yeah.
Michael, are you familiar with the, I believe it was some sort of tool found in Texas that was dated to be 400 or 500 million years old, or
well,
something
I think
like
that is the hammer.
A hammer? The hammer, yes.
The iron hammer from London, Texas.
Correct.
And
that's the one.
I actually saw that object in an exhibition that was held in Austria a few years ago. There was a man in Austria who had gotten together a lot of these anomalous objects from all over the world. He'd gotten in touch with the people who owned them or from the museums that had them in their collections, and he gathered all of these things together in an exhibition that was held in Vienna in Austria. And to open the exhibition, he had a conference with speakers, and I was one of the speakers. So after I gave my talk, I went through the exhibitions, and I saw this London hammer. It's iron, and it had a wooden handle that had started to turn into coal, and it was found embedded in rock that was it was about 100 million years old, I think the estimate was, from the time of the dinosaurs. So,
which would have to make you think that they had at least some sort of modern ways of melting.
Of course.
Yeah, and it was actually, because normally iron would rust away, but this iron was, it had some alloy. It was an alloy, with apparently some kind of minerals in it that prevented it from completely rusting away over those vast periods of time. So that was pretty interesting, an interesting discovery.
Yeah, that's really neat.
Well, there's a whole lot. See, what's really amazing is, say, my book, Forbidden Archaeology, is about 900 pages long. When I first started my research, for this book, I was thinking, okay, let me see if there's any reports of evidence that humans have been around for a lot longer than most scientists now think possible. So when I started the research, I thought, okay, maybe I'll do about 8 days of research. I'll dig up a few little interesting cases. I'll write a short article about them, and then I'll move on to something else. But when I started the research, the 8 days turned into 8 weeks, the 8 weeks turned into 8 months, and the 8 months turned into 8 years, because one case just led to another, and then to another, and then to another, until finally I had hundreds of these cases. And to me, that's the most astonishing thing. Sometimes people say, what's the single most interesting thing that you uncovered in your research? And for me, it's not just one single case that's the most interesting thing. To me, the most interesting thing is that there are hundreds of these cases that have been reported over the past 150 years up to the present of things like this, of human bones, human artifacts, human footprints going back many millions of years, completely contradicting everything we're being told in the textbooks today.
Right.
No, you're right. Yeah, absolutely. Which makes you wonder, again, like we were talking about at the beginning of the show, why they suppress all this, why they want this information not to be out.
Well, it makes sense because the status quo is so sensitive and fragile. Any anything that contradicts what the official story is could make us look at things differently, and then everything would change to our benefit instead of the benefit of the oligarch, the elite.
Yeah, I think that's ultimately what's behind it. In one sense, it's just human nature. You know, for example, if I love somebody and somebody tells me something bad about the person I love, I don't want to believe it.
Right.
You know, I may even become angry at the person who says it. So, you know, scientists are pretty much in love with their theories, and if they hear something that goes against it, they get a little upset.
Right.
But I think it's also some testimony to the power of the knowledge filtering process, because the supporters of the dominant ideas have gotten all alternative ideas excluded from the textbooks. This has the effect of delegitimizing this kind of evidence in the minds of students who are the next generation of scientists. They're kind of taught, stay away from this. This is not going to be good for you and your career. You know, if you want to get your PhD, you want to get your professorship, you know, you got to stay away from this, and they do. You know, so I think it's just a testimony to the effectiveness of this knowledge filtering process. I think if we were able to get the alternatives into the curriculum and then just let students make up their own minds about these things, we'd see things changing a little bit.
Right.
Absolutely. No. I'm not laughing about it. It's so true. It is. It kind of bugs me that it's not. You know, it's kind of happening now, but it's not. And it kind of bugs me that it's not happening more at this point. But I don't know. Maybe I'm being kind of greedy about it, but.
No, dude, you're right. It's a shame because the world is so much bigger than we're told, and it's really sad that all this knowledge and information is suppressed.
Yeah. It does bug me. It really does, because it's been out here for so long. And
I mean, it's like everything else that's suppressed.
Like me, you and Jeff and Mark, and obviously in Mr. Cremo, we've been getting this information out here. I do think we're making way. Consciousness, people's consciousness, you know, they're waking up, and it's building up, and I do think we're making way.
And I think that scares the elite, and that's why they're upping up they're upping up their drama, their tyranny.
Yeah. They're countering it the best they can, but
right, they fear the tides are turning, and they are.
I do think we got this. I think we got this. It's going to take a little bit of time, but I do really think that we got this. Same thing that I was listening to Joe Rogan the other night. He said the same thing. So, I mean, not that I'm looking at Joe Rogan for everything, but, you know, I mean, like, that's good, you know, because he's got a popular show, and he knows what's going on, and he knows people are catching on, and it's great that we're able to bring this out here. And I know I got a lot of messages I got to keep up with right now, and I'm not even going to bother, but yeah, so we got a lot of people on our side. We just got to keep at it.
There's a lot of people who don't want to see the world change too. I guess they're really truly fear change.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine the world if everything was like, if we were truly free and all this information was readily available to everybody, and all the technology.
It is ready. Yeah, it's available. That's the thing.
It's available, but
I've noticed it though. I have noticed it recently that people are actually catching on, and it's positive. We got to work with it, right? Am I wrong?
No, absolutely not.
Okay. All right, Chris, do you have any more questions? I'm all dry. I ran out.
I do, but we only have a few minutes left. So
yeah.
So Mr. Cremo, it's an honor to have you on tonight. I'm just honored to be able to have a chat with you, and I know that my co-hosts are too. So we'll get you back on again.
It's been a pleasure. So could I give my website if people want to check out some further information? mcremo.com, mcremo.com. They can find information about my books, upcoming interviews, and things like that on that website, mcremo.com, mcremo.com.
Welcome to CAB Radio 2.0. Here are your hosts, Chris Perkins, Mark Cummins, and Jeff Giles.
So, Michael, I do have a few questions. I'm kind of wondering about the mainstreamers. What's going on now? Are they more willing to listen to you at this point? Like, since you've done a lot. So, I mean, are we moving forward here, and are they catching on? Are they starting to listen to you now?
I think some of them are. This is, as far as the mainstream scientists are concerned in my work, I see three major groups. You've got one group of scientists that I call the fundamentalist materialists, who are very much committed to the current Darwinian evolutionary ideas, not so much, I think, for purely scientific reasons, but for more or less ideological reasons. It confirms their prior belief in atheism and materialism, so they're kind of very much in that camp. And they're very much opposed to the kinds of things that I do. They don't want to hear what I have to say. They don't want anybody else to hear what I have to say. Sometimes I've been scheduled to give lectures at universities, and then the lectures get canceled and things like that. There's another group of scientists in the mainstream who may accept the current theories, but for more or less scientific reasons, which means they're open to listen to alternative ideas and evidence that contradicts the current ideas. And it's scientists in that group, that more open-minded group, that have invited me to speak at leading international scientific institutions like the Royal Institution in London, the Russian Academy of Sciences in Moscow, and others. And I've been able to present papers at major international scientific conferences in the field of archaeology and human origins, like meetings of the World Archaeological Congress and some other meetings of other scientific associations in that area. And some of my papers presented at those conferences have been about 300,000 or 400,000 years ago. I would say that at the beginning of the history of life on Earth, an extraterrestrial being manifested the human vehicles for conscious selves to inhabit on this level of reality. And when I say extraterrestrial being, I have an expanded conception of what it means to be an extraterrestrial. Some were very much influenced by the ideas of modern materialistic science, would say that an extraterrestrial is simply another flesh and blood machine made of matter like us, but just from some other part of the universe. I would say within the term extraterrestrial, we have to include all kinds of beings that people would categorize as angels, gods, God with a capital G, and things like that.
Right.
Higher beings, higher dimensional beings, not only extraterrestrial, but extra-dimensional beings. So I would say at the beginning of the history of life on Earth, a couple billion years ago, extraterrestrial beings, who I would say were what people might call demigods, on behalf of the Supreme God with a capital G, manifested the first human vehicles for conscious selves to inhabit on this level of reality. And then those human vehicles began to reproduce themselves on this level of reality. But that would be a couple billion years ago, not 300,000 or 400,000 years ago. So the two views have something in common. Extraterrestrial beings, as conscious selves, we're all extraterrestrial beings, but there are higher level extraterrestrial beings who at the beginning of creation manifested the human vehicles, plant vehicles, animal vehicles for conscious selves to inhabit on this level of reality. So there's some ideas that I have in common with the researchers who are proposing this scenario that you propose, but also some differences. And I would say I want to focus more on what I have in common with such people than with what differences I have with them. But normally, if you listen to me talk in lectures or you read any of my books, I don't get very much into criticizing the ideas of others in the alternative history field.
Right.
But if somebody asks me a direct question about what I has a right to accept whatever makes most sense to them, but I don't think that any individual or group of individuals, even if they're the majority of scientists, have the right to tell government to exclude every other idea from the textbooks in the classrooms.
Okay. So I want to go back to... I'm sorry, Chris, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I was just thinking, couldn't the mainstreamers actually use what you found to help their case? That's what I've came across. I thought that there was there could be a lot of theories, mainstream theories that actually could use the things that you found that would actually help their case. I'm kind of wondering why. I'm not wondering why they don't use it. I kind of have an idea of why they're not using it. But
they don't want to be ostracized by the community. They don't want to be critical.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I think there are things that I say that could be, for example, I think there is a kind of evolution that goes on, but not the kind that they talk about exactly today.
Right.
I think there's an evolution of consciousness in the course of reincarnation. A soul or a conscious self might be in the body of an animal, and then gradually, lifetime after lifetime, it will come up to the human form. So there can be an evolution of consciousness that I think is a reality. And, they may take that idea, and that would be a better kind. If they want to accept evolution, fine, but the kind that they're talking about, I think, doesn't work. But I think an evolution of consciousness would work.
Okay. So I asked earlier about ET influence. Do you think, because I've always suspected that ET influence, that they've been influencing our DNA, possibly they even created humanity sometimes ago. And could that be the case? And Could that be why the religions believe that God created the universe? I mean, not the universe, but humanity. And could it, instead of being God, really just be some ET species that created us to be like a slave race, and over time have genetically manipulated us and attempting to create, to upgrade us, I should say?
Well, there are people and researchers who are supporters of that idea. And, there are elements of that idea that I do accept. Sometimes the way researchers who support that idea present it is like this. They would say, life came from chemicals, as mainstream science says, a couple billion years ago on this planet. And then the single-celled creatures became multi-celled creatures in the ocean. And then some of them came on the land and became animals. Some of the animals became monkeys and apes. And then some of the apes and monkeys about 6 or 7 million years ago became the first ape men. And those ape men gradually developed for a couple million years until about 300,000 or 400,000 years ago, at which time the supporters of this idea would say some extraterrestrials came from some other part of the universe and manipulated the DNA to produce a slave race. So they would say the process of materialistic evolution went on up to the point of the ape man called Homo erectus about 300,000 or 400,000 years ago, at which time there was an extraterrestrial intervention where they manipulated the DNA of the ape men on this planet to produce human beings, the first ones about 300,000 or 400,000 years ago, and they used them as a slave race to mine gold. Now, there are elements of that I would agree with and elements that I would disagree with. The main thing to keep in mind, as far as I'm concerned, is we're not just machines made of matter that are controlled by DNA. As I said, I think there's a conscious self that exists apart from matter. Now, in that sense, I would say we're all extraterrestrials. As conscious selves, we're not from the world of matter. We're from a higher level of reality. So I would say we're all extraterrestrials. None of us are from this world of matter that we now inhabit. We're all from some higher level of reality. Now, as far as our human vehicle is concerned, I would say, as I've shown in my book, Forbidden Archaeology, there's evidence that the human vehicle, the human form of life, has been on Earth for millions and millions of years, tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of years.
Wow.
So I wouldn't agree with the idea that 300,000 or 400,000 years ago, some extraterrestrials came and manipulated the DNA of the ape men and produced the first human beings, like published in peer-reviewed scientific publications. Now, I think I don't want to say that all the people who listen to me agree with me or endorse what I have to say, but I think the fact that there is a significant group of scientists that is willing to listen to some new and alternative ideas is an important sign. And I think if ideas are going to change, the first thing is people have to be willing to listen to new ideas. So I regard that as significant. Actually, my most recent book, My Science, My Religion, is a collection of 24 papers I've presented about the kinds of things we've been talking about this evening. The archaeological evidence that humans have existed for millions of years, the idea that the conscious self is not produced by the brain. I've been able to present these ideas at scientific conferences, and this latest book of mine, My Science, My Religion, is a collection of 24 papers that I've presented at major international scientific conferences on these topics. So I would say there are some slight signs of hope for progress in these areas, but don't want to minimize the challenges either, because this first group that I was talking about, the fundamentalist materialists, are very powerful and influential in the world of science today. And of course, I mentioned there are three groups. The people who are very much opposed to me, the people who are open-minded and willing to listen, and then there are scientists who actually agree with me, who are very few in number these days, that I have to admit, but there are some. And then there are those who simply don't care about these things at all. So,
sure, of course.
I think real scientists are supposed to be open-minded. Otherwise, they come off looking like shills, like Bill Nye.
Right.
I don't even look at him as a scientist. Sorry, I don't.
Yeah, well, say personally, I don't mind, say, if an individual scientist is a supporter of the Darwinian theory of evolution. If they've looked at all the evidence and that's what makes most sense to them, then fine. I respect intellectual freedom. What I don't think they have a right to do is try to convince government to exclude all other ideas from the education system and thus marginalize and silence opposition to their ideas. I don't think they have a right to do that. I think any individual